Welcome to episode 3 of Let's Model series. And in this third episode, I wanted to expand on what we did in the Let's Model episode 2, where we created this wall with a window. And I wanted to do a doorway with a door that fits within the theme and the modularity of this asset right here that we created in the second episode. So in this entire episode, we focus on modeling and matching to create a doorway and a door that can be used in a modular fashion. And throughout the process, we also export all of these into Unreal Engine 5 so we can check for modularity and see how they all fit together. So this way you'll have a doorway and a door that can be opened, can be closed, and that will fit within the theme of the other asset that we created in the second episode. So this episode stands alone. You don't have to watch the second episode to understand what we're doing here, but it helps to see it all come together to create another asset that will fit within the theme of another asset created. So let's begin. So I'm going to begin with the asset that I'm trying to match to already inside the scene. This sci-fi wall we created in the last episode. I already know the sizes that I want, so I'm going to try to match it exactly in terms of creating the detail, first of all, the dimensions of it, and so it's the same proportion, as well as the detail right here on the bottom when we extrude the portion to the top and then we curve that around. So that way the doorway asset will match up perfectly to this modular wall. So I'm going to create a cube, and height baseline is going to be -1. So it's on top of the ground plane, and the width, if you watch the second episode, is going to be 300, height 300, and depth is at 20. And let's go ahead and snap it. And I'm going to position this one and snap it right next to it. So that way I can just double check and make sure that everything is lined up when I start extruding and putting in the cuts. So first we need to go ahead and start making the cuts using multi-cut and outline where the doorway is going to be and how big it needs to be. To determine that, I need a placeholder, or even just a placeholder for the future door, so I know exactly where the cuts would need to go, and then I can start aligning them to the grid. So I'm going to create a whole new cube with the dimensions of the door, and that's going to be our template. So I'm going to create another cube. Let's go to Inputs tab. Again, it's going to be -1 for the baseline, and then for the width for the door is going to be 120. Height is going to be 220, and depth is going to be 5. Good width and height for the door is anywhere between 120 to 140, and height between 210 and 240. And we'll just have to play around with these to determine the right size for the door based on the character and how it feels in game. And just based through experimentation, these are pretty good values to start with. And let's go ahead and drag this out. So that's going to be our door. It's actually, we're going to use this as our door when we start modeling the detail into it. So it serves as a template right now, but then we'll use it to add the detail and actually create the door from this. So let's go back to the wall or the doorway. I'm going to go to front view, and let's go to model toolkit, activate multi-cut. And I'm going to start inputting my cuts. So the first one is going to be here on the bottom. So that's going to be our bottom base, the base border. Then let's create one across here. It's going to be for the door, cutout, and one at the top. I'm not lining them up yet because I'm going to actually snap these vertices to the grid. Right now I'm just placing the cuts. Let me check. All right, now let's switch over to vertices. And back to front view, I'm going to select the bottom vertices. I'm going to hold X, make sure that they are snapped. The bottom portion is 20 units high, so it's going to match our wall. And let's snap these to the grid as well. So I'm going to hold down X, snap these verts, snap these as well, and then snap the ones at the top. And just to show you my grid options, let me go to display, grid. I like to periodically show you what my settings are. So here's what I have. Primarily the grid lines every 10 units. So each grid unit is 10 centimeters, and subdivision has been changed to 1. And length and width, I set it to 2000. That's the size of the overall grid inside the viewport. I have a more detailed tutorial about setting this up so it matches Unreal Engine 5, and you can take a look at that video. Now let's go ahead and switch over to face component mode, and actually let me move this door. Gonna move it to the side. We'll come back to it. Now that I have the cutout, I no longer need the door for the moment. Let's select the doorway, and I'm gonna delete and cut out the door. And I'm not gonna close these up just yet. Let's select the faces in the front and the back, because I want to have the same type of extrusion being done for the front and the back. So it matches this curvature right here on both sides. So I'm going to extrude all these selected faces. Control E. The thickness of this, since I already done the wall with the window, I know exactly the dimensions that I need to do for everything else to match up. So my thickness is going to be set to 4. And then let's go to edge, and I'm going to select these two bottom edges and also the two on the other side. Just get a little closer so I know they'll match, but I know they'll match because I'll use the exact same values I did for the wall with the window. And then let's bevel. Control B to bevel, and my fraction is going to be 0.05 and my segments are going to be set to 2. And then I'm going to enable soft and hard edges so I can fix one of these edges to set it to a soft edge. So Shift, right click, hold, go soft and hard edges, and toggle soft edge display. And it's going to be this edge, as well as the two on the other side. And I'm going to set them to a soft edge. All right, so now if I hold, if I hit Alt 5, so I can turn off the wireframe, just to see if these two are seamless, and they are. Let's bring back the wireframe, Alt 5. All right, now I am ready to close this gap up. And for this, I'm just going to select two edges or more edges and bridge them. I'm going to do this kind of in sections. I'm going to select the two, then bridge it again, just to know that everything's working as it should. Now I could select them all and bridge them like so, and bridge them in. It should work. All right, so we have a doorway. Now for this doorway, I want to have a bit of curvature on the inside at the top to kind of match the theme and the style that I'm kind of going for. Curved corners for the window, also curved corners for the doorway. So let's replicate that as well. Gonna switch over to edge component mode, and I will select these three edges on the inner corner, all on each side. And I want to make sure that I have nothing else selected. So let me do this again. 3, 4, 5, 6. So I should have only 6 selected by the time I'm done, right before I do my bevel. And I always check my heads up display for the amount of edges selected, and it's 6. Now let's bevel, Control B, and it's just a matter of determining the fraction and the amount of segments. So let me go to front view, and I kind of want to match similar tightness of the inner beveled corners. So I think fraction of 0.5 might be too much. So let's go 0.25, and let's do amount of segments. Let's go 4. Let me try my fraction at 0.2, see how that looks. Maybe 0.25. It's also a good idea to, at this point early on, begin to establishing the connection with Unreal Engine 5, exporting it and just seeing it from player's point of view. You can get all the right dimensions here, they may look good, even with the scale reference, and you're trying to match everything too, but the ultimate test is going to be always seeing it in-game from player's point of view. So let's go ahead and do that right now, and I will probably periodically just export this and import it just to check. So all my sizes, all my curvatures are correct and they look good. So let's go back to object mode, and I'm going to do my export selection. So I already have it on my custom tool shelf, but I usually go to File, or you would usually go to File, Export Selection. And because I'm modeling on the world origin, I actually want to modify this. I'm going to snap this in the corner. I tend to like placing my pivot points on one of the sides of the mesh. So I'm going to just quickly modify this, since I'm kind of keeping the pivot point on all the static meshes, on the modular meshes right here in the corner. So I'm going to keep that kind of consistent. All right, now let me go ahead and export selection. So again, I recommend that you add anything you do over and over again to your custom tool shelf. So I'm just gonna click export selection and navigate into my folder and just name it. So for this one, I'm just gonna name doorway. Let's do underscore and just do a variation. Since I already did the test of this, I just want to save it as a different name. doorway underscore LM4 let's model. And let's export selection. And my settings are very similar to all the other videos I've done and all the other episodes whenever I do export. It's FBX, export, smoothing groups enabled, and smooth mesh enabled. Now let's jump over to UE5. In UE5, I already have a map created. The previous mesh that we modeled in a second episode already inserted that I can test. And I'm just going to import into my static mesh folder the exported doorway. And I'm just going to keep most of these settings are the same. I am generating missing collisions. Sure, I would modify it later on and tweak them, but I just keep that on. For the doorway, it's not going to work properly because we won't be able to walk through the door because that requires a bit more custom collision setup. And then I am not importing any textures and I am not creating any materials. Let's go ahead and import all. Whenever you get this message on import saying that you have degenerate tangent bases resulting in incorrect shading as well as the nearly zero binormals, this is because you have not UV'd your mesh. Once you UV it, this message would disappear. It wouldn't show up. I'm going to ignore it for now. And let's take the exported mesh and I'm going to place it right between these two walls. Let's go ahead, rotate it and snap it. And it should line up. Let's go ahead and just drag that in right in there. All right, perfect. So the two meshes line up. Everything's correct. Based on the curvature of the inner corners, that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and spawn. I'm going to spawn inside the map as a first person. I'm going to walk up. Not bad. Not bad as a first person. Looks even better in third person. So I have a way to set that up. I have ability to switch between blueprint, first person, and third person templates. And you can spawn in both. So I'm actually going to override this game mode to third person and just see it from third person view. And that looks pretty good size. So I like that. I'll probably expand the doorway a little bit or maybe make the door slightly larger, but we'll see. Overall, I like the overall size and mainly the curvature. And the modularity now works. So now I can be satisfied that whatever changes in modeling that I do, the modular aspect of this mesh works with the other modular wall window. So back in Maya, I do want to make a slight adjustment and make this doorway slightly bigger, maybe 10 units on each side and the height. I didn't like how small it was from from first person view. So before I go further, this is why it's good to export. You can kind of see if you need to make adjustments early on before you get too far into detailing. I'm actually going to undo as far as so I don't work those bevels in. So I'm going to undo them until I get to the straight mesh. Let me go ahead and modify my pivot point again. And then I'm going to make adjustments for the bigger doorway. So let me grab this door. I'm going to bring it back. And I'm going to adjust my doorway first and make it the size that I want. So I'm going to increase it to, let's do 120, let's do 130. Let's do 140. And then height is going to be 130. 230, not 130. All right, so this is the size of the door. And let me just quickly select the verts. Not for the door. Let me just move this out of the way. I'll move it back. So, and then let's modify the verts. So let's just snap these 10 units higher. 10 units to the side. And I want to kind of keep straight lines so it looks nice and neat. And do the same thing on this side. And I can't see the door because it's beyond this line. So if I want to see the door in front view, based on the view that I'm using, it's front -Z. Anything in the other axis of orientation kind of get pushed behind a certain line, behind world origin. You can see it kind of disappears. I could change the view from here, but why do that? I can just move this in front and I see my template for the door. And just let me double check that everything's aligned, and it is. All right, good. Let me move the door out of the way. Now, since I've gotten the door bigger, I can go ahead and reselect those edges. And I should still have them selected, and I still have 6. Perfect. Now let's do a bevel, 0.25, and 4 segments. All right, I'm not going to export this time, but you may want to go ahead and export and double check to see if it looks good inside the engine. Let's go ahead and fix this up before I begin to introduce some detail into this wall, and then we are going to work on the door. So to optimize this, because we have a lot of floating verts on the flat surface, that's of course unnecessary. Let's optimize this. First, let me delete my history. And let's go to Model in Toolkit. And I'm going to use Target Weld. Now, I don't want to do this to both sides. That's a lot of work. And I'm going to utilize symmetry. So I'm going to go into Model in Toolkit and enable symmetry on object and on what axis do I want to make this symmetrical. So I'm just going to look, and I'm going to make this symmetrical on object Z axis, front to back. So let's go back and enable symmetry, object X, enable target weld, and let's just start dragging it up. And it's actually doing it on this side, which is fine. It doesn't really matter. We need to merge on both sides anyway, so it could be in the front or it could be side to side. I can also do Z. So that way it just does it to the other side. Actually, I prefer this one. So let's go ahead and just target weld all these verts and optimize this particular area. And let's check the other side that it worked, and it did. Let's do the other side now. And that should work on the opposite, on the back end as well. Target weld this one, and then let's drag this one to the top and this one to the corner. Always check both sides before you move on, and it looks like it worked. Now I need to delete all this mess with too many edges. We don't need those. So I'm going to disable object and turn that off, the symmetry. And I like to work in this one just a little bit more precise. I could have done it with symmetry mode, but that could have got me in trouble depending on what it selects. So it's just a little easier when I start. Just switch that off for this instance. So I only have 3 edges selected, so I'm going to hit Control Delete to remove that. Again, Control Delete will make sure that you are deleting floating verts. Very important that you press Control Delete so you don't leave those stray vertices on edges left behind. Control Delete. That's done. Let's take a look at the bottom. If the grid gets in the way, just turn that off. Alright, looks pretty good down here. Alright, I don't need this edge. I'm going to double click on both of these. And I actually want to keep this edge. So I'm going to go back to Vertice component mode, and I'm going to weld some of these again, optimizing further. So let's do symmetry, and let's do object Z again. Target weld. Merge these two and these two. Got a problem with my soft hard edge, so I'm going to select both of these edges and set them to a hard edge. Often happens when you target weld. Alright, let's optimize further by kind of connecting some of these together. I don't need to, it will triangulate automatically. Since we're here, it's a small section, let's go ahead and manually do this. So I'm going to keep the object Z symmetry enabled, so I don't have to do this for both all of the sides manually. So I'm going to select these two, and I could use multi-cut, but in such a small area, sometimes multi-cut will cut across the entire mesh. It'll start snapping to other objects, other vertices. So in a small area like this, I actually like to do this manually by selecting the 2 vertices, then hold down Shift, right click, hold, and connect components. And let's do this one and this one. And hit G to repeat last use command. For this one, let's do the same thing. Select these two and repeat last use command by hitting G. And then do the same thing for the other side. So utilizing symmetry mode speeds up a lot of your time. So you don't have to do this manually on all sides. And then let's take a look. I do have a lot of verts here, so I will need to fix that, but not yet. I need to keep the interior portion straight for the moment because I do want to add a border frame, like a door frame, a small section of a door frame that will come out from the doorway I don't want this door to be right in here, and that will actually help me to create a more straight doorway. That frame will create as a more straight doorway where the door can be positioned in between. And you'll see in just a minute when we do this. So let me bring back my grid and let me disable symmetry. Here's what we have so far. Now let's introduce a small border right here in the center. So that way we can have a door that's not going to be right in the door frame, but it'll have a nice detail added for the door frame. Like so. Let me just position that in here. So we don't have this door right here, but we'll have a nice little frame on the inside. Similar to this kind of idea right here, where we had the window, frame, and the glass. A little extra detail. So this is what I want to introduce for the door. Now the one thing that I do want to have is a straight door and not a curved door. So I'm going to have to rework the inner frame a little bit to make that straight. So the door is also straight and it'll fit right in between. However, I could introduce a curved corners at the top for the door as well. And that would just require me to bevel those corners at the top so they fit within the door frame. But in this case, I actually want to have straight. So in order to introduce extra geometry in here, this is why I kept this not optimized yet, because I wanted to have the straight lines, is I'm going to introduce a cut in here, and I'm going to introduce new edges. And then we're going to bevel those edges to create the extra faces in the center so we can extrude them in to create the frame. Before I do, let me go ahead and make sure I delete history periodically so I don't have any problems with this mesh and with the scene file. And I'm going to go to Model and Toolkit, and let's do a multi-cut. I'm going to hold Control and middle mouse click so it places the edge in the center. It did it all the way around, but I'll deal with that extra edge on the outside later. Switch over to edge. I'm going to double click on this edge. It also selects on the outside. I'm going to go to front view, and I'm just going to hold down Control and marquee deselect the edges that I don't need, like so. And just double check that's the only thing I have selected is on the inside. Now I only have a single edge. We need extra faces in the center so we can extrude those faces. So I'm just going to bevel this single edge that I have selected to introduce a second edge. And a fraction of 0.5, that's actually what I want. But to double check that the door can be inside and these edges and the faces that are going to extrude are thicker than the door. Let's bring the door back. I'll place it right there. And actually, let me modify my pivot point right there in the corner on the grid. Hold D, then X, middle mouse click and drag to snap it. So you can see that the faces that I'm going to extrude are this one right here. So they're equal distance on both sides. And I have enough thickness here. So that's perfect. So let me press Ctrl 1 to select just this piece of geometry, the wall, the doorway. And then I'm going to select all these faces that I want to extrude. I'm going to select the face on the bottom, then hold Shift and double click on the face next to it. It should only select the faces on the inside. Let me double check on the bottom. Oh, it has a bit of a triangle. So let's hold Control and deselect these two. So the only faces I have selected are on the inside. And now let's extrude them. Control E and add thickness of, let's do 5 for now. And let's take a look what that will look like in front view. And let me do 10. I'll probably do 10. So here's what I'm going for. And this is how I'm determining the thickness of the amount to extrude. Let me bring the door back. Let's press Ctrl 1 to bring it back. Oh, the door is right there. It's already there, so let me go back to front. Alright, so the door is going to have to be aligned to this edge right here, because I'm going to take these right here, all these verts, and I'm going to merge them and make them straight and merge them together into this corner. So this way I have a curved outer corner for the frame, but then this one will be straight. So that means I need to resize the door to make sure that it fits into this area right here. So that means we'll need to resize the door, and for this door frame, let me bring back the menu. If you hit T for transform, this will bring back the floating menu of the last operation you used. So if I set this to 5, you can see I won't be able to align these verts right here to make them straight while keeping the outer corners curved. I could do this at a lower grid setting, but then I have to resize the door. That will also have to be on like a very small grid set size. So it actually would destroy my modularity. So instead, trying to align it to the 10 unit grid system. So the doors also remains, because the door is separate. So I'm trying to make the door also stay on a 10 centimeter grid system. So I don't have to go lower to like 1 unit. It will make it a little bit more difficult to position inside Unreal. So this is why 10 set thickness is going to work for this. So this way all these verts are going to get merged. So let's do that now. I set my thickness to 10. And then I'm going to select all of these verts. Let's start with the center one. I'm going to hold down X and just move them all right there in the same space. And let me take a look at the front view. Let me move the door slightly back. So here's what I have. I will have a straight corner where the door will go, but then the outer corner will be curved. And that's what I'm going for. Now, if you were doing a door that's curved at the top, just like the door frame, then you wouldn't need to do this. But I'm trying to make that straight, so let's do the other side as well. So let's hold X and just snap these right there in the same, spot on the grid, and check in the perspective view, make sure nothing is overlapping, nothing is messed up. And then I'm going to select all of these verts, hold shift, select all of those. I have a lot of overlapping verts on top. At the moment I have 20, and I'm going to hold down shift, right click, hold, merge vertices and merge vertices, and it should bring me down to only 4. Perfect. Now they've been optimized. So that gives me a nice looking border and a door that I can position on top, right on the inside. Now this border right here that I'm looking at, it looks a bit too thick. Actually, maybe wanted to make it a little smaller. Maybe 5 units in, not so much. Let me see if I can do this. Probably not going to work because of this wider curve. But let me change my grid options to grid lines every 5 units. Yeah, so if I drag these, 5 grid units is the least amount that I want to work with modularity. It still will work. I would just have to change in Unreal to 5 grid unit size right here at the top in order to make the door itself fit on the grid. If I go down to 1, that's not going to work. It will not work modular wise. It's way too low for modularity. So 5 is the lowest amount. So in my case, there's no way that I can switch it to 5 and then maybe snap this over here, because then I will destroy overall my outer curvature. So I'm just going to have to work with the 10 unit grid system. If I wanted to have it less, I would actually need maybe have less of a fraction for the outside of the curve when I first created that curve, when I beveled those inner corners. Maybe a little tighter, so they're a little closer together. Or maybe make the door wider, so that way I wouldn't have this. So I would basically have to rework this if I wanted to make this thickness right here, this distance, smaller. So I'm going to have to stick with this, unless I want to spend more time reworking it, which at this point I do not. So since we're keeping this thickness for the door frame and the door, and I need to bring the door back, let me switch this back to 10. Let's position it right there in the center. Go back to front, and I'm just going to adjust the vertices and snap them so the door itself fits within the door frame. And actually we kind of went back to the original door size, which was 120 by 240 or 220, I believe. If I need to check the sizes, you can always check the dimensions of anything you have inside your scene by hitting Control T, and that will give you the dimensions for an object. So here's 220, that's the height, and our width is 120. So yeah, we went back to the dimensions we were using originally. So actually it kind of worked out. And let's go ahead and do a test with Unreal. So I'm going to select, and I'm going to export these two separate objects. So that way you can have a doorway separate. So I'm going to select the doorway, and let's export this, and I'm going to overwrite over doorway LM. Yes. And for the door itself, let me position it in world origin at its pivot point. We're going to export this, and this will be door_LM. Well, let's model and export selection. Inside Unreal, I will re-import the doorway take a look, I don't have any textures on top, so I can switch over so I can see more of a shaded view. That's a solid color by switching to lighting only. Gives you maybe a little bit better representation, or maybe detail lighting. Yeah, let's do lighting only. And let's import the door. So I have the FBX and I'm just going to drag it into the content browser. Door LM. All the options from previous import are going to be kept the same. And here's the door LM. Let's go ahead and drag it. I'm going to rotate it. And let's position it right there. I will need to adjust my pivot point. It's actually not in the corner anymore. But let's just work with it as we have it. And I would adjust it later. And just see how everything lines up. Let me switch over to 2 camera speed. Alright, everything's looking pretty good. Now if I take this door, the pivot point is going to be messed up of course, but you can. This is how you can have the door open a little bit. For some doors, some doorways, and for some other ones you can keep it closed. So it's working. Let's spawn into the map. And that's pretty good size. Let's go ahead and optimize the doorway, and then we're going to finish up with the door. So I'm going to select this, Control-1 to isolate select. Let's remove unnecessary edges. So I'm going to double click on this edge all around, just see how far it needs to go. It looks like we have a bit of a problem here. Let's actually fix that before I delete that edge. Let me remove the grid. So for this piece right here, I'm going to target weld this. This one on the other side, like so, and do the same thing on the side. And now I can go ahead and double click on this edge. It's not going to select anything in the bottom. And let's press Control Delete to remove it. There's an edge that we have right here. I should be able to double click and see if we can delete it. No, I cannot delete it. Not yet, so I'm actually going to target weld this vert to here. Let's do it on both sides. And then on the other side. I could use symmetry, but this is going to be a little bit quicker. It's not that many to weld. And then I should be able to double click on this edge. And hold shift, double click on this edge. And I should Control Delete them without any problem. And I'm always double checking. Anytime you do things like this, you always double check. See if anything got deleted where you do not want it, where it begins to collapse your geometry. Alright, that looks pretty good. This doorway has been optimized and it is now done, modeling wise. Let's bring back the grid. Let's delete history on this. Press Control-1 to bring everything back. And let me first make sure that I am working with this particular pivot point, because when we modified our door to make it smaller, we maintained the pivot where it needed to be, but now the geometry has been moved, so we need to modify the pivot point as well. So let me modify it DX, snap to the grid to be in the corner, and then when we export, it'll update in UE4 as well. Alright, so for the door, I want to have a window, a small window opening here with curved inner corners, just like we have for the rest of the geometry, to keep the theme and the style consistent. And then I want to have some kind of a keypad going here on the side with a doorknob or a door handle. So I'm going to select both faces on each side. Let's do an extrusion, Control E, and I'm going to not thickness but offset. Let's go to front view and just start moving this up. And let me bring back the menu and just continue with the offset, like so. Now I'm going to switch over to vertice component mode, and I'm going to start moving the vertices and just start getting the size that I want for that window to be. So the window is going to be right around here on the side. The door handle and the keypad is going to be right here, so I want a bit more space. So I can actually move all the verts to the side a little bit more, like so. And then also let me take these 2 verts and I'm going to move it down. So I want to angle this window opening so it's not straight, and then we're going to curve those inner corners, something like that. Let me go ahead and delete these 2 faces so I can actually see with the character reference in here. I think that's pretty good. If I want to make it smaller, I can just modify and move those verts like so. And if I need it, I can move all of them together. All right, let's create the inner portion and then curve those corners on the inside. So I'm gonna select these two edges. I'm gonna bridge them to create the geometry there. So I'm gonna select those two. I'm gonna hit G this time. And repeat the last, use Command to bridge. Then let's select the inner corners. So it's gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4 edges. And let's bevel them. Let's go to front view so I can see the curvature of it. Control B to bevel. Let's add 3, let's do 4 segments, and for the curvature, I think 0.5 is pretty good. Let me take a look at perspective. Get rid of the wireframe so it doesn't get in the view. If you don't have any lights inside the scene, you can actually see a silhouette of this by hitting 7. Yeah, I like this. Let's hit 5 to go back to wireframe. Shaded view, and then Alt 5 for wireframe unshaded. And then let's optimize it right away. I'm gonna hit Control 1 to just work with this door. Let's enable symmetry, and I'm gonna do this object Z. Let's go to target weld, and let's just target weld these right here in the corner, those in the corner, and it does it to both sides. All right, we'll bring everything back. Let's delete history. All right, door is coming along. Let's create the keypad area and the door handle. I'm gonna disable symmetry. Let's go to front view, and I'm gonna create a cube. This is gonna be our keypad section. And let's just position it where it needs to be. Right by here. And let's get it inside closer, like so. Let's make it smaller. Right about there. Basically, we just resize it based on the human reference scale you have inside the scene. Might be a good idea to even export this and test it inside the game engine. Right about there. I'm only going to work on one side, and then we would duplicate for the other side. So I actually want to select this face in the back. Let's delete it. And I'm going to switch over to vertices and just push that in until it overlaps the door. So it's going to be a separate piece of geometry that you would eventually combine with the door. Like so. Let's, I'm going to go ahead and take this temporarily. Actually, I'm just thinking how I would do this very quickly so I can export this. Let me modify the pivot point for this area, for the keypad area, right here on the bottom. So that way when I move both of these, they're not going to get modified. They'll both get moved at the same time, and they won't get moved from their areas of position. And I just want to snap this back. I want to do a quick export just to see how the keypad looks, if it's big enough. And let's override the door. And then let's re-import it. And let's adjust it. Let me go to one of the other better modes to look at. Yeah, I think this is pretty good size. Let's spawn. Yeah, that's pretty good size. And I like the opening for the door, where the window is going to be, the glass. So that works. Highly recommend that you do this throughout the entire process whenever you add something, so that way you can always test in game. And once you've established that connection, early in the process, re-importing it becomes very quick. Let me go ahead and undo inside Maya. And now, let me select this face. I'm going to press Ctrl E to extrude, and I'm going to create that little dent where the keypad area is going to be. So let's make it smaller and then scale this down like so. Let's go to front view. Let's move that up. Scale it up a little bit more. And then let's hold Shift and extrude that in. Like so. Alright. Maybe if it's too big, of course you can adjust it, no big deal. Just select the verts and just scale them down. Scale them up if needed. And I want to do an extrusion. Based on the player, how far that they are in third person, you don't really see much detail, so you can actually keep those corners straight. In first person, you might be able to see a little bit more of the detail on the keypad. So depending on the game and the player's point of view, you add detail if the player needs to see it, if it's going to be in close proximity to the player. So I kind of like the first person view more. So I am going to select these edges right here, and I'm going to do a bevel. And let's do a fraction of 0.25, maybe less, 1.5, 0.15. And let's do maybe 2 segments. So that introduces a little bit of a curvature right here. Looks pretty nice. Again, this will not be noticeable in the third person character view. All right, I'm going to keep this. Let's move it slightly forward. I kind of want to have a little bit of a bulkier area. So actually I'm going to take these and just move them back until they overlap with the door. Let's go back and bring back the wireframe and shade it. And the last step will be we need to create the door handle. Now the door handle I want to keep simple. So I'm going to start with the cube. And let's go to front view. Now bring the cube here. To bring, whenever you create an object, it's always going to be created in world origin. But you don't actually have to go and select the gizmo in order to drag where you need it. So once you create the cube, if you hold X and then middle mouse click and drag, it'll snap to a grid. So as long as you had that object selected when you created it, which will be selected, you can quickly snap it to the grid into your view. And then now I can go ahead and resize it. So the door handle is going to be right about here. Let's make it larger. It's way too big. Something like this. Now let's go to perspective and just move it in front. It's way too big, so now it's just a matter of resizing it and get it to the right scale. Kind of looking at the hand as well, so that kind of helps. Let's make it a little bit less deep. Then I want to take this and extrude it, that face, and extrude that face out, and then select this face in the back and hold shift and extrude that into the door. Let's start positioning it a little bit better. So it's going to be right in the center right here, and then maybe make that hand a little less in width. Zoom out and just see it in proportion to the door. Zooming things out and just seeing how they all work together kind of helps to keep everything, you know, to proper dimensions and proportions to everything else. All right, I think that's going to be pretty good. Again, one more time, let's temporarily, I'm going to combine everything and then modify my pivot point on the bottom here, snap it to the world origin and export. Overwrite the door LM back inside Unreal, simply re-import. And that is looking pretty good. Let's spawn. Yep, that's nice. That's a very good size. And let me switch my world settings to first person and spawn. Yep, that looks pretty good too. And back in Maya, let's undo real quick because I don't want to combine them just yet. And again, if you wanted to optimize, not optimize, but add a bit more detail to this handle, let me isolate it, Control 1. I'm going to delete this face on the back. I don't need it. And what I can do actually is just bevel this entire object, Control B. So it'll just add a curvature, a bit of an angle to every corner. Low poly, we have 13 faces or 26 triangles. If you bevel with just one segment, it goes up to 94. So it all depends if you want to add that extra detail. And in my case, I'll go ahead and add it. But again, it's all up to you. How detailed are you going? Will the player see this? And even in first person view, we didn't really see that much. But just want to show you how to do that to an entire object. Create a little bit of a detail on the handle. I do want to add the glass with a single plane, and then I want to curve and angle these corners right here on the inside. So let's actually do that first. I'm gonna select all those edges. Let's do Control B to bevel them, and let's do 0.75. Slight angle. We'll introduce a little bit more detail in there, and I don't want to do 2 segments for there. I think 1 segment should be enough. And let's introduce a plane. Let's make the plane larger. And I'm going to rotate it so it's facing us. This is going to be our glass. Let's go to front view. And I don't need all those subdivisions. So I'm going to change my subdivision width and height to 1. Let's position it and I'm going to scale it. So it's only going to be positioned right in between the door where the glass would be. Like so. Actually, let me switch over to vertices. I'm just going to raise this up. And here we are. Just check both sides. Looks pretty good. And for the door handle, let me make sure I delete my history. I'm gonna take these two and I'm gonna duplicate them for the other side. Now, because I wanna have them on both sides, before you duplicate, you have to UV your objects, and it's a lot faster if you UV these now, and then you can duplicate them for the other side, so you can overlap those UVs on top of each other so they use the exact same texture. And that way it'll save you time, so you don't have to UV exact same geometry twice. But since this is only modeling, this is only Let's Model episode, I'm going to UV this outside on my own. Let's go ahead and have it on both sides so we can see it in engine modeled as well as in Maya. So I'm going to take these two, I'm going to combine them. I'm going to duplicate them. And I'm going to invert my scale so they appear on the other side. It's going to be easier than for me to have to rotate. So if I flip my scale on Z -1 and then just drag them to the other side, it's a lot, and just position it to the door, it's a lot quicker to do it this way. Now let's select everything. We're going to combine, so that way we have the door, the glass, and the handle with the keypad all together. Going to modify my pivot point right there in the corner. Snap the door, let's export it, override it. Let's do another export for the doorway. Make sure I override this, the one that I need, which is doorway LM. And let's jump over to UE5. Now let's click over to each one, right click, re-import, and then right click and re-import. And let's switch over to Alt 5 for shaded mode. No shading, just detail lighting only. And let's take a look at both sides. I'm going to insert a light really quick. Hold L, left click, inserts a temporary quick light, point light. So you can see it on the other side. Alright, looking pretty good. Let's spawn. Walk up to the door. We have a door handle and a nice looking door that fits within the theme of what we've been modeling. So now you have a doorway and a door that can be opened, can be closed, or you can just delete and use it as a doorway only. So you have some versatility by keeping the door and the doorway separate. And then you would just duplicate this for modularity and then vary it by having the door in different positions. So that is how you model a modular doorway and a door within a modular set that we worked on in the last episode. All these Let's Model episodes, we go through a lot of the tools very quickly. And I don't stop to explain how to use them because I expect you to already know how to use them. And we just focus on the problems and the solutions that come with modeling certain objects for environment art and for level art. But if you want to learn how to use all these tools, all the fundamentals you need to get to this level so you can model quickly, as well as how to UV, which we don't do in Let's Model episodes, then I recommend for you to pick up the home study course, Maya Foundation. This way you get to learn how to begin using Maya, how to model, and how to UV completely from scratch. So pick that up so you can begin to create your own original custom environments and not have to ever rely on marketplace content or procedurally generated AI 3D content.